Hello, I'm Allie, and I've been in a wheelchair since 1995 and have been living here in Mexico part-time about a year and a half.
Hey Gen Max, you just met Allie, and I've been wanting to do this video for quite some time, and it's about the accessibility of Mexico. So if you are in need of some kind of accessible mobility or a dog or something like that, what is life going to be like if you move to Mexico? Or for the future, looking at your future in case you're in a wheelchair or something like that. That's why I wanted to make this video, is just to really open up the, what the opportunities are and what the struggles can be. So we're going to cover an awful lot in this video, from her house here to going to the grocery store, just getting out and walking the dog, things like that. So lots and lots of good stuff. And feel free to leave comments down below, and I'll try to get to those and make sure we get the best answers possible for you if you're looking for accessible information here in La Paz, but also in Mexico in general. So let's meet Allie a little bit deeper.
So I started exploring places for an early retirement. I've been a special ed teacher for almost over 20 years. And I was thinking, oh, okay, I want to find a nice warm climate somewhere outside the US that's a little more affordable. And that's how I ended up in La Paz.
So if you followed this channel for a while, you know that Kat and I moved here kind of on a whim. We didn't know La Paz even existed a couple weeks before we bought a house here. But let's hear Allie's why La Paz and if she looked at other parts of Mexico.
La Paz was attractive to me. I'd come here a couple times on vacation to explore, and I did explore other parts of Mexico. And I ultimately decided on La Paz for several reasons. One, I did like the aspect of having access to a very warm ocean that's nice, and the temperature in the ocean here is pretty nice, and you can swim almost year round. And I was looking for something that had a peaceful ocean that was not full of waves. So it makes it easier for someone that has a disability to actually enjoy the water, the warm temperatures, and swim without waves. The other thing I did find when I was exploring La Paz is I found a very wheelchair accessible beach called El Cormel, which is really the closest beach to my house. And the reason I like that beach is it has a wheelchair ramp that goes down to two wheelchair accessible palapas that I could do by myself. So I could park, get my minivan parked in there are many handicap spots there, and let my ramp down pretty easily. And they offer, I think, 4 wheelchair accessible beach chairs that you can just leave your ID, and they will loan them to you for the day. And it's first come, first serve. So I tend to enjoy that beach Monday through Thursday, because on the weekends it gets really packed.
It's so great to hear that there are some accessible places here in terms of getting into the water. So, and I think I've seen the wheelchairs that are accessible, and great to know that they have them here and free to the public to use. But let's look at some of the other places in Mexico that Allie might have looked at, and maybe look at why they didn't work out.
So the other areas of Mexico that were a thought were Cabo San Lucas. And the reason I chose ultimately not to explore that any further was it's very touristy. It's a little more, I guess, too fast-paced. And I was looking for something a little more laid back and peaceful. And I also really enjoyed Todos Santos, but I felt like it was a little too small, but I still love it. And the beaches there are not nearly as peaceful. You have to deal with the mighty waves of the Pacific Ocean there. So the other place that I really looked at was a place called Progreso, and I really explored it on the internet more thoroughly than I went. I would like to visit it, but I chose that area because I saw in several of the videos that it had a lot more wheelchair accessibility than a lot of other places on the mainland of Mexico. But I would still like to explore more places on the mainland and try to add more accessible places to visit to my list while I'm living here in Mexico.
So let's bring it back to La Paz now and hear specifically what she likes about La Paz.
So I think my favorite part about La Paz was the Malecon. We have a beautiful Malecon, and it's extremely wheelchair accessible and flat. There's really nice 2-sided ramps that you can go kind of in a circle to get on and off of. Everything it's marked clearly where the accessibility is, and when you cross the street, it's pretty safe. It's pretty easy. There's clear markers for someone in a wheelchair to cross the street from the Malecon side to where all the restaurants are. So that was really my favorite part that attracted me to La Paz, was our Malecon. And they have a wonderful bike trail on the Malecon, and I use a hand cycle, and I liked that particular bike trail because I didn't have to ride my hand cycle in traffic. and to get a little exercise. And I use a power assisted hand cycle. I take it down there pretty often, honestly, and just kind of cruise the Malecon and my cycle with all the other cyclists. And I feel it's really safe to do that for a person in a wheelchair. And I've actually probably seen several other people just wheeling, using their manual wheelchairs, exercising in our lovely bike lane there. And it's long. I mean, it probably covers at least 2 miles of pretty flat terrain that you can easily hand cycle with. Sometimes I'll just take my power chair down and walk my dog along the Malecon, or get in the bike lane if I need to go a little faster than some of the walkers in the Malecon.
And you guys know how much I love the Malecon too, especially Sunday nights on the Malecon. But let's hear, I always look at La Paz and Mexico in general as being very far behind the United States in terms of wheelchair ramps. They're either super steep, or they're at an angle, or they don't exist at all, or the sidewalks have steps in the middle of them. So there's a lot of lack of accessibility that I see. So let's see how Allie has gotten around kind of just the reality of living in a place that doesn't have the Americans with Disabilities Act for, I don't know what it's been, 40 or 50 years or something like that, and having things kind of come around to be really accessible.
Definitely Mexico is pretty far behind the United States when it comes to wheelchair accessibility, and you have to be patient and creative. That's two things I tell people, when my disabled friends ask me, how do you do this? I'm like, well, you got to be patient, you got to be creative, you got to do your research, and you got to explore. So I found, just by exploring the La Paz area, all of the streets that have wheelchair accessibility, from the Malecon up to the cathedral area, the nice park there, and all that, those are the 2 areas that I think I tend to walk my dog. I have a service dog, and I walk her down Cinco de Mayo Street. It's a beautiful sidewalk that's fully intact, and there's a steep hill, so it would be a little bit difficult for someone in a manual wheelchair to do without assistance, but I use a power chair, and I will go, and it's flatter than some of the hills to get up to the cathedral area. And then there's a couple of other side streets. There's a paved alley by Parker's that, thank goodness they paved it, because before it's really narrow. I think 1 car can fit. But since they paved it, I kind of, will use that as a side street to get back up to the, cathedral area if I'm walking down the Malecon. And there's one other street that I can get from. I think it's by El Pereje. It's a restaurant downtown, and it will take you all the way up to the Malecon. And there's actually curb cuts on the ramps. You got some of your ramps in La Paz and your curb cuts will have a kind of a steep step to get down that would be difficult for some wheelchair users. But my manual chair does pretty well with some of them. And then sometimes you just end up on the street. If you are cruising down the sidewalk and there's like a step, or what Brighton was talking about, or a huge chunk of sidewalk missing, I'll just roll back down to an area that I can get in the street, and I will put my flashers on if it's dark, and just roll in the street and exercise caution with cars. So I use a permobile wheelchair that I've been using this particular kind, which is kind of like the Cadillac of wheelchairs. And so I have, flashers on both sides, so people can see me when I'm having to divert to the street to get somewhere. And then of course there's headlights. Okay, and then the headlight, there we go. Just a little extra lighting if you're cruising around downtown, which I do sometimes because I find this city pretty safe, especially in comparison to some U.S. cities that I would not go by myself after dark. But La Paz, I find a very safe city for the most part. There's some improvements. I'm hoping that this video might shed some light and maybe bring some improvement to the accessibility of La Paz.
Okay, so a really awesome wheelchair, definitely. So I want to talk though about kind of the day-to-day or week-to-week things that you need to do. So grocery shopping, visiting friends, going out to restaurants, things like that. So let's hear about that.
I do some of the grocery shopping. My husband does some of the grocery shopping. Sometimes we go together. But when I go alone, I typically go to the Arambro because it's close. And it's accessible to get your wheelchair in, but the aisles can be very narrow. My chair's narrow, but I think a person that had a wider wheelchair might have a little bit of a difficult time shopping at the Alhambra. And then the other places, all your big box stores like Walmart, Sam's Club, Chedraui, Soriano, they all have ramps and flat, pretty much ramps, flat, wide doors, decent handicap parking. And then restaurants, we have a couple of favorites, restaurants we go to. And most of my husband will maybe go in before me or go check it out and make sure it has accessibility before we decide we're going to go. And then if it doesn't have accessibility, we may choose another restaurant. If it does have accessibility, we'll go. And if we don't know, we carry a portable ramp. Because most of your stores and your restaurants, you might see one or two steps. And the ramp that we purchased, I think I got it in the US, it's aluminum, it folds up, it goes in a bag, it's lightweight. If you have a really strong upper body, you're healthy, you probably could maybe get this ramp out independently by yourself. But for the most part, my husband goes with me and he sets the ramp up, and then I maneuver up. And that's also been extremely helpful when we're visiting friends. You might go to someone's house and they might have one or two steps to get in. And most of the friends we've been to, we always have, check it out before we go. But having that portable ramp has just been like a game changer. And I think that if you're going to move to La Paz or consider it and you have a mobility issue, you definitely should purchase one of these. I might even be purchasing another one. I feel like the one I have is a little short. You can purchase longer ones for more steps. So that would give us even more access if we went to a place that had maybe 3 steps.
As we were prepping for this interview, Ali mentioned that the Arumbaro downtown actually has a parking lot. So I'll be sure to have a video or a little piece here that shows you where that parking lot is. That's good for everyone to know. But let's talk more about parking.
So all your big box stores like Walmart, Rally, Sam's Club, they have handicap spots, a lot of them. But I drive a side loading minivan that deploys a ramp from the side of my car. And in the US, there are loading zones. In Mexico, there are not. So you have to be kind of creative and mindful about how and where you park. When I'm alone, I really calculate where I'm going to park. Like the Arumbaro, they don't really have a handicap spot, but I will back into 2 spots in the middle so no one can block the side of my car and just take up 2 spots. And so far, I haven't gotten a ticket. So I have a handicap placard, so far so good. I haven't gotten towed or any tickets yet. But as far as the other, the big box stores, I usually take my husband with me because there have been times where, we pull into a handicap spot and we come out and someone's parked in the spot next to us and you can't get the ramp down unless you move the car. So those are mindful things you have to think about because they're just not the same handicap spots as you're used to in like the United States. The Malecon, there is a lot of handicap spots and I've memorized most of them. And I usually try to find, there's 2 in particular I always try to find because I can deploy my ramp onto the sidewalk. Some of them you pull in and then my van has the ramp on the right-hand side and it'll just unfold on the sidewalk in the handicap spot. Or sometimes you can parallel park. There's a couple of parallel parking handicap spots on the Malecon, and then you just deploy the ramp onto the sidewalk, and then just roll right out, and you're on the Malecon.
So Ali mentioned a handicap placard. I want to hear if that's a Mexican thing or if that's left over from the United States.
Well, currently I still have California plates. I haven't attempted to import my car, and I have a placard from the United States, which is built, put on the back of my license plate. Here in Mexico, though, I have been kind of observing other people parked in handicap spots here, and I see that most Mexican plated cars do not have a license plate with a handicap. So I think you have to probably get a hanger. Most of them are like hangers in the car that I've seen. So I think that if you were trying to import your car here, you would probably have to request one of those, and it would be just a hanging thing because I've seen those here since I've been living in Mexico.
And I have found that people really are good at respecting handicapped spots, that you don't find people parked in them, except for like at the OXXO where there's just, 3 spots and then the handicapped spots. So people park in them for, just a couple of minutes. But otherwise, I think everyone is pretty good at leaving those spots open. But let's switch over and talk about the house here that she worked to build.
I renovated houses in the United States for wheelchair access because I've been in my wheelchair since I was pretty young. But this is really the first house that I was able to help work with the builder, design to be wheelchair accessible. And my builder, Francisco, which I think many people that watch this channel know, was really great about making modifications. All my doors are 42 inches wide. I just kind of sent him all my specs of what I wanted, what I would expect in a home that was completely built for a wheelchair user. And some of the things we did, we instead of putting in cabinets underneath the sink, we just left it open. So a wheelchair user can roll in, and we made sure and measured the specs. And then the same with the island, which is behind me. You can kind of see it on the other side. It has, so a wheelchair user can roll in and, cook on the cooktop. And then obviously the most important part, bathroom accessibility. Again, there's a barn door that slides open, so it kind of slides all the way out of the way, which is aesthetically pleasing, and it works really well for a wheelchair user. All of my vanities and all the bathrooms, instead of the doors, we just left it open, so a wheelchair user could just roll under the vanities to wash their hands, and then of course roll-in showers are basically probably the single most important thing for a wheelchair user. And builders, I think you have to really, there's some mistakes that get made. We had a mistake in the shower when the floor plan was sent over in the videos of how to do it. There was a curb originally in the shower when I came because I wasn't here present when I was building the house. I was just flying in periodically and checking on it because I was still working full time at my job. But for the most part, Francisco was great about fixing the little things. I think when you build a house anywhere, including Mexico, you're going to have some small things that come up. But that's one thing I can say about my builder, Francisco. He would work with me if I had an issue like the curb. He was like, "Oh, don't worry, Miss Allison, we're going to take that out. We're going to fix it." And that was the other thing with the pool. We kind of had to redo my pool ramp because I have a ramp to get in and out of the pool, a sliding ramp, and it had to be redone a couple of times to make sure it worked. But he was very patient with me and was willing to work with me to work out the small little details on the accessibility of the house. But overall, it's a very wheelchair accessible home. Everything is just wide open, no obstacles for a wheelchair user, no steps, everything's flat. The doors, like I mentioned before, 42 inches, I believe, is how wide we went, which is even higher than what the Americans with a Disability Act requires.
So what's great here is my friends Gaji and Paul are our friends. Allie's also their friend. They have the same house by the same builder, but it's kind of the stock model, I guess, without anything being accessorized, I guess. So we're going to do a quick comparison here to show that the doors are bigger on Allie's house. Also, the way the kitchen works. So the main living area here is wider so that you could get a lot more space in the kitchen to be able to move around the kitchen island. So doors, kitchen, also just getting into the house. So there's no step here on Allie's house, whereas on Gaji and Paul's there is. And of course, the pool is going to be different too. And I think also the area, the sliding doors, because this is a bigger room, that's a little different on these two houses. And of course, the bathroom where they've removed the little bump out here. And this is something to talk about, is everyone struggles with any kind of customization on their home, being it about accessibility or just about kind of your personal taste. I have another video where they added on a couple of feet to their house. They wanted it to be a little bit wider than what the original plans were. And when they saw the foundation being dug, they measured it, and it wasn't any wider because the construction guys are just used to doing the same thing, because there's a lot of the houses are exactly the same or with very small changes. And so they keep doing the same thing, maybe not looking at the plans every time. So it's really good to be here, to be able to every day even see what's going on, to be able to say, oh yeah, that needs to change. For instance, we just had a door installed last night. By last night, I mean, it got finished installing at 11:40, but I had purposely bought very special hinges in the United States that will automatically close the door, and the contractor just didn't like them, and he put on kind of standard metal hinges. And I was like, well, where are those hinges? And it turned out to be a pretty big process to get them to change the hinges, but they just they do things the way that they've always done things. So if you're asking for changes, be sure to stick around, be sure to be there to check on things, no matter if your house is accessible or not.
So I think when you're thinking about any custom home, you really do, like Brighton mentioned, need to be here, I think. I think that's the key component, is being here. I guess you can be part of the process when you're building your home, and I unfortunately was not able to do that. But however, I think Francisco, I would recommend him to someone who was building a custom home that needed wheelchair accessibility, because he was communicative and he was willing to come back and make the corrections to make everything work for me. And in the end, the home works perfectly for someone who has a wheelchair, or even someone who had mobility issues, who needed everything flat.
During that quick tour, we did meet Maddie Maria, who is her service dog. And that is something that I do want to talk about, because I met someone else down here with a service dog, and she had some trouble with having a service dog down here. So let's talk all about service animals.
Mexico varies greatly from the United States. I've been questioned, even if I have her identification on or her card that I carry. Like, I've had someone say, well, we don't do that in Mexico. We don't recognize service dogs in Mexico. And I'm like, well, sorry, but this is a service dog and I'm taking her inside. And then no one's ever kicked me out. And I just proceed to go inside. So I've had that happen a couple of times, but I frequent the same places, and it only happened one time at the store. And then after they got to know me and the situation, everyone welcomes us and, really actually wants to, engage with the dog. But it's definitely different here. I think service dogs are not probably something that's in a law in Mexico like it is in the United States. But the airlines so far, I've traveled to Valaris and of course Alaska, and no issues with the service dog. You just have to have the proper paperwork. And you do it ahead of time with both airlines. You submit everything ahead of time, and then they will check it. And neither airline has ever given me a hard time about traveling with my dog.
Really interesting coincidence here is Crystal, the person I was talking about earlier, who has a service dog, is a tenant here living in the casita. So I did get permission from Crystal to tell her story. So let's hear Allie telling Crystal's story, because Crystal is not in a wheelchair. So let's hear about that.
Our dear friend and tenant next door has a lovely, beautiful service dog named Vader. And we were kind of sharing stories about our experiences with going into places with a dog in Mexico, traveling with a dog in Mexico. This is a service dog. And she said that she's been kicked out of a few places and, not able to enter because her dog is clearly, has his vest on, very well behaved service dog. So, I guess it just varies, people. And I think it just brings awareness that people with service dogs may not be in a wheelchair. and it's in the United States, that would have never been questioned. But in Mexico, it's definitely different, I guess, is a good way to state how they recognize service dogs and, versus the United States.
So really, I guess everything is going to be depending on your specific situation as to what your abilities are or what your disabilities are as to what your situation is going to be when you're living in Mexico. So let's get a quick tip for anyone who is mobility disabled, who is thinking about moving to Mexico.
I think the best tip I can give anyone who has a disability who's thinking about a move to Mexico is come visit, do your research, be patient, be flexible, and just have in mind what you're willing to give up. Maybe the perfect accessibility, like the U.S. is really accessibility. Where I live in California, no problems. I can go all over my neighborhood, but there are things I didn't like about California. So I think you have to come up with what you personally want in life. And one other tip that attracted me to look at Mexico for my retirement is, long-term possibility of needing caregivers or extra help was always in the back of my mind. And in the United States, it's really expensive and unaffordable to pay for caregivers out of pocket. Here in Mexico, it's very affordable to hire a competent, well-trained caregiver.
So Mexico definitely is affordable. And I am now in one of the least affordable places around. I'm in San Diego on Dog Beach, which is this amazing place that I love. Kat's here with me. But I just wanted to wrap up this video from Dog Beach because Allie, actually, there's an opportunity for you, I guess. Allie is going to be moving. She's no longer going to be living in La Paz, but she's moving to Ensenada. So she'll spend half her year in the United States and half her year in Ensenada. She needed to be closer to the United States for healthcare reasons because she gets her healthcare up in the United States. So if you are looking for an accessible house in La Paz, Allie's house is up for sale. There'll be a link down below so you can go check that out. Otherwise, I'll have some other videos up here from La Paz or just other foreigners who are living in Mexico. You can check those out down here. From Ocean Beach, San Diego, hasta luego. Oh!